Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending our webinars today. We've had a myriad of amazing speakers from researchers to policymakers to academics to people working in the industry across many different supply chains from 8:30 this morning. So it's just been um, really great to hear many different perspectives from the supply chain to hear what's going on really in the kind of geopolitical landscape at the moment and to learn about how important it is for young professionals who want to get into this area, what the kind of things that they need to look at. So thank you to all our participants so far, and really exciting today to present this webinar we have now. So my name is Ruth Clinton. I'm the Industry and Engagement Manager here at E3, and I'm delighted to open this session. Delivering during disruption, visibility, transparency and transformation with our speaker, Patrick Van Hull of interos.ai. So Patrick is an esteemed strategist and advisor renowned for his practical expertise, his profound business acumen, and an ability to transform innovative concepts into actionable strategies. He has a diverse background, which includes extensive experience managing supply chains as an hands-on practitioner with Dell, Rio Tinto, Apple, and CVS Health. His advisory, analyst, and consultancy roles at SCM World, Gartner, and Deloitte demonstrate his expertise in this field. Patrick is a trusted advisor to senior executives. His recent engagements with SAS Platforms, Kinaxis, O9 Solutions, and Interos exemplify his dedication to advancing digitally enabled capabilities. So Patrick holds a Bachelor of Science in Industrial and Operations Engineering from the University of Michigan. He has an MBA from Duke University and is a lecturer in Supply Chain Strategy at the University of Arkansas, Wilton School of Business. Currently, Patrick is Supply Chain Storyteller and Industry Principal at interos.ai. So, without further ado, I'll open the floor to Patrick Van Hull. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Ruth. And now that I hear that out loud, I'm sorry for putting so many words on the page. So I appreciate you reading that.
Amazing background. I'm so excited to hear this presentation. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. I mean, it's an absolute pleasure to be a part of this, and knowing that there's such a diversity of experiences that have contributed today.
Fantastic.
And really the opportunity to kind of blend across some of those. And so that's one of the things that I think is most impactful of today is the ability of supply chain to have meaning in so many different ways and to have the global impact that it does. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of the session. And certainly Ruth already went through much of this, but my career by way of a slide looks something like this. And really the thing that I want to convey, and certainly I won't bore you with any additional details, but the thing that I want to convey here is that three-act play, that interconnectivity between being a practitioner, between being an industry advisor and strategist, and being a thought leader and evangelist in SaaS platforms has really given me a unique viewpoint on supply chain and really the opportunity to come and speak with you today. I think if I were to characterize it in a little bit of a different perspective is really this idea of saying an operator, an advisor, and an innovator. Now, when I think about what supply chain means to the world, and I think one thing that's become incredibly convicted in my mind is that supply chains indelibly shape the human experience. When we think about all of the right things coming together, we think about the environment, the timing, the care, the effort, all of that is what we get. And it's in a way, it's not unlike a flower. We think about the way that what we see at the output is really magnificent. It's truly something that we don't represent all of the things that go into it ahead of time. But when we think about the food on our tables, the medications we need and consume, the devices we rely on, the digital services that we can't live without, supply chain are the architecture that powers it all. It's really not possible without supply chain when we look at everything in our lives. And so That's the place that I start from today. And really, we think about what the perception of supply chain is and the reality. In some cases, the outcome does get more attention. And we think about the news stories about supply chain, the blame that it gets for when there's a product not on a shelf or when a delivery is late or when we start to hear about tariff conversations. Ultimately, all of these conversations are about supply chain, and they don't necessarily reflect the entirety of the process. And certainly we live in supply chain, and what we know is that we don't really operate from a place of homeostasis. It's not constant and stable. It is part of the equation, but really, if we continue in the vein of looking at biological terms, we operate more like allostasis, which is a concept about stability through change. And so one of the pieces that's critical here, and it's a concept that I learned about a couple of years ago through a book, Masters of Change or Master of Change, and I find the applicability to supply chain especially relevant, is that there are continuous cycles of order, disorder, reorder that exist within life, but also within supply chain. So if we start on that left-hand side, we think about the stable operations and the robust processes and the predictable performance. Well, then guess what? Disruptions destabilize it all. And it changes moment to moment, as we've seen the activities of last week and the activities of yesterday. And so the destabilization of it causes us to think about what to do next. And the one thing we know for certain is we can't just stop there. In some cases, yes, it is catastrophic, but really it becomes more about the opportunity for us to put ourselves in position to adapt in the responses that we bring forward. And so we have to learn and adapt and adjust as we think about what it means to thrive in supply chain. The increased complexity is demanding more agility of us. We need to be proactive. We need to be data driven. We've got shocks like pandemics and so on. And we start on the upper left-hand side. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner was delayed at launch because they ran out of bolts. The Ever Given was delayed because it got stuck in the Suez Canal. The fact of the matter is that we are seeing more and more disruption happen. And we're seeing that supply chains are having to adapt to things that we don't even know that are coming. And so when we think about what it takes to deliver during disruption, there's really a question about, are supply chains built to resist change or to respond and rebuild through it? And that's the distinction that really matters more than ever. And so I've seen throughout the course of my career, companies and supply chains that have been so focused on preserving stability that when that disruption happens, they break. And I'm sure you've all seen it as well. And I'm sure that we'll see it to come. But those companies that thrive are the ones that may not be perfectly efficient, but they're strategically adaptable. They've approached disruption and adversity with this mindset that it's going to happen and that they've distributed decision-making authority. They've created the right buffers. They've identified the decision paths. They expected disorder to the point where they were able to reorder more quickly. And that's really where we start to get into, and we start to think about what that means in terms of our ability to deliver during disruption, but also the opportunity that we have to create competitive advantage through risk as well. And all of this is a bit bold, right? So this quote from Richard Branson characterizes it as that it's only by being bold that you get anywhere. If you're a risk taker, then the art is to protect the downside. There's that yin and the yang. And then we think about the capacity to evolve continuously and purposefully. We really must empower our supply chains to be opportunistic enough to react, to adapt. They have to protect the best interests of the enterprise, the business, our customers, our suppliers. The entire ecosystem is in our hands, but it's not necessarily just about bouncing back. It's about bouncing forward, better equipped, more aware, more aligned. And that's really where we put ourselves in the position that order, disorder, reorder is a natural rhythm that exists within supply chain. And we could stop fearing volatility if we embrace that. And so we build systems and teams that know how to move through the disruption and the adversity with confidence. Building the path forward in it's a purposeful, orchestrated effort. And far too often we try to fix it with any one thing. Certainly working in technology, we hear this quite a bit. We talk about features and functions and so on. But the entire toolbox needs to be considered here. And so I think about the capabilities for the future, and I draw back on a quote that I heard here from one of the board members at a company that I've worked with. The impact is on what is done with the technology, not the technology itself. And then later he added, so it is necessary to identify what set of tools can be used to elevate the ability of supply chain to tackle a particular issue. We need to be able to make deliberate choices about how we're going to enable these capabilities, because ultimately it's about what we do with it. And so we have to align our talent, our systems, our data in this transformation that we're looking at. The ability to deliver in the moment, but also to deliver for the future must be designed. It's not something we're going to stumble into. And so we have to build intentionally along the way. So as we move into the first of the items on the title slide there, I want to give you a couple of different perspectives on what these terms mean. They get used often, and it's the type of experience that we will pursue, any single one of them. But really, it's about how we start to connect them together. And so when we want to empower supply chains, we must enhance the information, the quality, the timeliness, the relevance of the information that's available. It's not just about needing more data, and in some cases, that's not even good data, but it's about needing the right data. And we needed it in the right time. It's like a supply chain of its own. And it reminds me of what one chief supply chain officer told me just about a year ago. He said, if you're waiting for all of the information before making a decision, you're never going to act. So we must be able to augment the human intelligence with actionable insights. We need to be able to take complex data. We need to be able to automate the predictions and increase the accuracy. Because when disruption is happening, time is of the essence. So when we can get to information, even if it's imperfect, but it's good enough, we need to be able to do that. And the more that we can enhance that information and put it in the hands of our people to do something with, that's when we start to be able to work through these disruptions as something that's just a fact of life. But it's not free. It's a complex conversation. And so we need to think about the cost, the complexity, the constraints. And so we think about how much can we realistically monitor? It's a lot. In many cases, you can be mapped down to your third tier supply chain and you don't even know it yet. What level of supplier insight is achievable? Again, there's more than we know. And it's certainly things that we can tap into, not because we have the additional human capacity to, but the enhancement of the information and the intelligence is very real. And then we must also balance the needs of customer data with privacy and so forth. So when we think about the information, we must prioritize the information that truly empowers action, because there's a lot that we can bring into the conversation, but if we're not going to do anything about it, that's just adding to the noise. So let's get to the point so that we can actually do something about it. That brings me into the idea of transparency. And when we think about transparency, it's about expanding the intelligence to those that need to act. Now, I love this quote from the book Nudge. It's a lot about decision architecture, but generally people make good decisions in contexts in which they have lots of experience, good information, and prompt feedback. Now, as an individual, it would be great to have all of that. But the power of our supply chain teams is that we have all of that in aggregate. The sum of the parts is less than the value of the whole. The entirety of our experience here is that we can bring people together with that experience, with the information, and we can create the feedback loops so that we're working in a transparent environment. We can orchestrate collective responses that go about talking about the problem to solving it. And it makes me think a bit about a line from the Verizon credo. So Verizon, obviously the big telecommunications company. And the line in particular that I think about is that they exercise constructive dissent and then rally around the agreed upon action with their full support. The ability to have real conversations about what the problem is and how you're going to act on it, and then doing it. That's the place where we get everybody to drive accountability and responsiveness. Who's going to act on what? The transparency that flows through the organization isn't in that siloed type of information point. We aren't necessarily concerned about who knows what, but it's about where is the critical information that we've enhanced, and then how do we put it in our team's hands to make the informed decisions? And then what should we flow to those other people on our supply chain? The idea about disruption is being able to get to the point more quickly with that visibility and the transparency in mind. Now, the transformation piece, transformation is used all over the place. And in many cases, it's confusing. The idea that sometimes we talk about it as doing the same thing as before, but better. That's more like continuous improvement, but some see that as transformation. The idea that we need to understand with transformation that it's always evolving. If we think about the trajectory of a long-term goal, when we start, perhaps we think about an airliner on its path. Even the smallest of changes to that path line at the beginning can dramatically impact its path toward the goal. So we need to be able to adapt along the way. The transformation process is really about anticipating those changes, where we're going to experience the disruption, and then adapting to the change along the way. We need to keep that end goal in mind, to borrow from Stephen Covey, and we need to deliver to it. When we think about transformation, we need to know what that to be state is and constantly be working on it. It's easy to get thrown off stride. We talk about it from the disorder piece, but that's why reorder is so important. And when we build the methodology, the mentality, that mechanism for acting on what's controllable, that's where we can start to really drive some of this continuous learning, the always evolving part of transformation. We can make decisions today that impact today or tomorrow or next week, but we also are making decisions today that have impact 6 months from now or 6 years from now. And when we think about this in that terms of the overall cycles, we really need to understand that we can embrace AI, machine learning, the prescriptive and prescriptive analytics, because we need to know when we get off course and we need to know what we can do about it. And we need to put that in the hands of our people to act. And that's where I take this into one of the items that's not on that slide on the introduction. But we think about trust as this invisible lever that's behind it all. Obviously, we all want to build that in our teams, but it's really the foundation for the future. Too often, we put people in the position where we ask them to do the same things over and over again, boring, mundane, repetitive tasks. We take the power from them. In one case, I spoke with the chief supply chain officer a number of years ago, and she said that she had become the bottleneck as she integrated into a new organization because people were afraid to make decisions or afraid to make the wrong one. And what so happened is that bubbled up and everything was being escalated to her. So her objective, and she was very successful in doing so, is empowering her employees with the right tools, the support, the autonomy. Give the data-driven processes. Give them the opportunity to have a strong, rational baseline for why they're making decisions. Create mutual accountabilities and partnerships so that you can have those lines of communication to know who to talk to, when to talk to. And when we're thinking about this period of disruption, it's not if it's going to happen, it's not when it's going to happen, but it's what disruptions are impacting us now and how do we need to act on them? What's most important? Which of the 5 things that are happening today require the immediate attention, and which can we wait a day, an hour, whatever it needs to be? And then ultimately, we need to create that feedback loop. If you go back to the quote from Nudge, that prompt feedback is about democratized learning. We all need to be able to learn from this. And that's part of the cycle of trust, is that this doesn't mean that we're always going to get it right. There's going to be those disruptions that we miss, that we don't understand, that catch us off guard. But it's not necessarily about that one time. It's about what we do and how that experience is going to make us stronger for the next. This is all part of a long-term commitment. Sustainability and long-term resilience is across the entirety of the network. And it's one that's built on the long-term, on durability rather than defensiveness. You can't avoid risk. You can't avoid disruption, but we really need to move into this place where resilience is systemic. It's a state of being. And so sustainability can take on a variety of different pieces. Certainly, we think about it in the environmental context most often, but they're all interconnected. When we think about the operational sustainability of processes, it's about efficiency and waste reduction in processes, like we talked about in continuous improvement, cost management, risk mitigation, investments in innovation. There's something that I saw today from Gartner, and it talked about the return on the future. When we are constantly putting ourselves in a position where we are trying to create an ROI of 2.5 years or 12 months or whatever it is, we may lose sight of the fact that we need to build for the long term while also managing through the short term. And then environmentally, we need to be a good global citizen. we understand the things that we can do. More often than not, we are able to have a significant level of control within the four walls of our factories, within the business that we have influence over. But we need to understand things like reducing the overall emissions, the waste, the fluidity of our processes, because the connectivity of supply chain is such that just because we're doing one thing right in one place doesn't mean that it's going to have the impact that we think. So being able to stop chasing individual risks and hoping to block them or choose individual pinch points, we build systems to thrive despite the risk and disruption and the roadblocks that may come. So long-term resilience really becomes the opportunity to grow into the future. Now, the path to resilience starts with intention, and it doesn't have to be big. This is the piece that we talk about resilience, we talk about supply chain, we talk about the delivery through the disruptive moments today, but we also need to be able to begin somewhere. So we think about how can we start small? Start with what we have. Do what you can with what you have, where you have it. And these aren't massive undertakings, but we can take the opportunity to identify our gaps and our visibility. Where do we have no information or imperfect information? What are the questions that we don't ask because we're afraid to admit that we don't have the information to answer it? Where is it that we are lacking transparency because there isn't a structure in place to bring the right people together to act? And where is it that we just simply aren't empowering people with our trust? There's a lot of top-down leadership. Certainly, we've all experienced it. We've all been a part of it, whether it's ourselves or someone we know. But how do we identify those gaps to say, look, we have opportunities to get better here? It's not pointing fingers. It's about room for opportunity and growth and learning. With that, we can start to fill those gaps by digital and tech upgrades. We can enhance our insight and agility. This isn't to say we're going to buy a solution or a tool or a robot that's going to fix all our problems, but we start to consider that entirety of the toolbox. And where is it that we can get better? Where is it we can alleviate some of the pain, the repetitiveness, the boring work that people hate? And how can we start to foster this culture of open communication and shared accountability? When we do things like postmortems and premortems, it's less about trying to blame an individual, but trying to get people to talk to each other so that they can start to understand how to solve the problem together. Good information, good experience, prompt feedback. Let's create more of these cycles and bring the people together so that they can actually do something about it. Pilots are a great way to test out some of these solutions and scale successes. The idea that resilience is an ad hoc process, that doesn't scale. So when we're going through these disruptive events and these moments in time, think about the approaches, the novel approaches we've taken. Think about the ways that we would build for the next time to deal with that. Think about the way that we want to be able to act in the future, and what's a relative step going forward. And then obviously this point that we've talked about throughout the course of the presentation today is embracing this continuous cycle of order, disorder, and reorder. It's knowing that adversity is coming. I will tell anybody who will listen is that you cannot avoid risk and you cannot prevent it. And you know that when things are going well, that at some point we need to be prepared for when it doesn't. And the opportunity there is how quickly we come back and grow and how we can raise the floor with this opportunity and come back stronger, faster. And so the flower returns. And we come back to this idea that the outside world sees the supply chain or a flower as something so beautiful and effortless. But we all know it's the result of care and design and resilience behind the scenes. And so when we consider what that means for supply chain, the outcome is going to overshadow the process. There's a lot of people working in a lot of different functions, from holes in the ground in open pit mine sites out to retail store shelves. It's all part of supply chain, and the success relies on strong design, deliberate planning, and excellent execution. But we need to start making those decisions based on the fact that the future isn't going to be defined by predictability. We know that you can no longer take 2 years of historical data and use that to predict your future forecast because there's too many things happening and they're all interconnected. If one lever's pulled, three more follow. So we will be defined by our ability to stay strong, to stay ready, and stay in motion as the disruption occurs around us. Because we don't get a say in if and when it happens, but we do get a say in how we act and what we do about it. So to conclude, I'll leave you with this. Supply chains have always been mission critical. We've been very specific on what we're trying to do. In many cases, we're trying to solve a particular problem in a moment with the information we have and do it over and over again. Supply chains connect the world. They shape our everyday lives. They carry the weight of expectation, disruption, and opportunity, often without the credit. But we know the work that we're doing is meaningful. And because of everything that's happening around us, we know that the work ahead won't be easy, but it's going to matter. And that's why we need to think about how we can deliver during disruption today. We can rethink terms that are so ubiquitous, like visibility, transparency, and transformation, but we can apply them to ourselves to think about them as defining characteristics of our supply chain and the ability to go forward. So I'll leave you with this. Let's be bold. Let's be intentional. And let's build supply chains that don't just deliver during disruption, but they grow stronger because of it. So I'm happy to take some questions and certainly appreciate the time. So thank you for the opportunity.
Patrick, thank you very much for that. That was absolutely mind-blowing. And as a kind of a bit of a strategy geek myself, I love the way you have portrayed and put this together. It's so insightful. The transparency around your, early warning system, developing that early warning system around expanding the intelligence that you already have, the transformation around using AI to adapt to in your business to predict for predictive analytics, and then that trust, having that, empowering your employees to trust them to provide feedback, provide research, and include all that in the kind of execution of what you're trying to do outside the normal kind of day-to-day workings of a company, and then the aligned sustainability and long-term resilience at the side. Incredible, absolutely amazing, very thought-provoking, and for me that was really, really enjoyable to listen to. So thank you very much for that.
Of course.
I think we have one or two questions here. So we've gone a bit over, but maybe we have time for one. So what strategies can organizations implement to ensure transparency and build trust with stakeholders whilst navigating supply chain disruptions?
I think one of the biggest pieces here is that I don't know isn't an okay answer anymore. But
Yeah.
being able to articulate that here's what we do know, here's the position that we're going to take about it, and here's what we're going to go forward. These are the questions that we're trying to solve for, and this is
Yeah.
how we're going to approach going to get those. That ultimately, especially when we think about those outside stakeholders, they're not the end step. They have to report to somebody else. So we're trying to create the flow of transparency of the information about where is it that we sit in the moment and what are we going to do about it. Inaction is a decision, but it can't be a passive decision. And so we need to be able to articulate this is happening, we're aware of what's happening, and here's how we're going to go and tackle it. Even if it's an incomplete plan, to be able to come from a grounded place and articulate that, that's very powerful. And that's the place where we start to build some of that trust. And if we need more information, if we have something that's missing, say that, ask for it.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes somebody might know these things or might have a different perspective. And we're so stuck with our heads down that if we're not articulating it, we might get lost in the moment. So really embrace the moment to bring others into the conversation with a practical approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I have another question here from Michael Walsh. And he says, hi, Patrick, what recommendations would you give to companies or departments who are still running a spreadsheet supply chain? What is your advice for the best first step, Michael Walsh?
Hi, Michael. Good to see you again. The one thing I would say with spreadsheets is that In some cases, they work. There are a lot of companies that run very well. Some of the best supply chains in the world rely heavily on spreadsheets. The question becomes, what problems do you need to solve? Because there's the place where we just are getting by and we're doing the job and we're creating a lot of manual work. This coming from somebody that built a forecast model using data warehouses and planning tools and exporting, and it took me half a day to run it. It was effective, it was a good model, but it shouldn't have required me 4 hours of exporting and importing data to do that. And so looking at the places where we get stuck, being realistic about the amount of time we're spending working on them, it's important. And then being able to say, what are the places that we need to get better? And here's where we see the gaps. I'll tell you from the technology side, go ask vendors. Go say, I need help with this, because they will absolutely pick up the phone, and go challenge them to see if there's something more that you can get. The more that you can help them help you, you're all going to benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I have somebody here. Hello, is it possible to share Patrick's lecture later? Absolutely. We'll put all this online. Harris Mustafa, in the face of increasing global disruptions, how should organizations strategically balance the cost of investing in supply chain redundancy with long-term benefits of resilience, particularly when pressured to maintain lean and cost-efficient operations? That's a great question, actually.
Yeah, I mean, so much of supply chain is about trade-offs. And
Yeah.
so if we're looking at it from the financial standpoint and we are trying to run lean because we want it to look a certain way on the balance sheet, there's a cost to that. If we run lean, we need to be able to articulate, if we run lean and we go out of stock, what are the products that we can't miss on? There are things that are more critical to the business than others. And so we need to be very purposeful about the decisions that we're making. You can't invest in everything. I was speaking with somebody yesterday, and they were talking about having to discontinue parts of their process. He said, well, it saved us $200 million, and that was the goal. So yes, it would have been nice to have continued it, but it also would have been nice to have an additional $200 million. So you have to be able to make the critical decisions about what's most important to the business, prioritize that, and put time and money into it, because that's the place that if you miss, you might not operate anymore. And so there are trade-offs that say you can't hit on everything, and you have to choose where you miss as carefully as you choose where you invest.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really great, note to end on, Patrick. Patrick, I can't thank you enough for your time today. It's been really, as I said, thought-provoking. I love the strategy around what you've spoken about. It's really excellent. So thanks again. Patrick Van Hull of interos.ai. And as I said, we'll have the recording of this talk on our website in the forthcoming days or so. Thanks again, Patrick.
Thanks so much, team.
Okay, take care. Bye.